how do we retain a Langmeil SKU within that business? So, for example, we had one where they said, "Oh, look, no, we don't think that wine's going to perform anymore. However, what we are looking for is a Malbec. Can you provide us with a Barossa Malbec?" I said, "Well, yes, of course we can." So we then switched. So we didn't lose the brand position, but it changed from SKU X to SKU Y, and that then comes with just not cracking the sads with the retailer if they say to you, "No, that's it, that one's not worked." It's understanding why and then being flexible enough to say, "Okay, well, look, we don't want to lose the relationship we worked for a number of years for whatever reason, and we understand why that product hasn't worked or that SKU has not worked. What can we do together to create something else so that we don't lose a SKU in your list?" Because the best thing about retailers is they give you a national footprint. Comes at a cost, of course, but it's about that mental availability and the physical availability of your brand.
Hey guys, it's Sid Patel, CEO of Beverage Network and your host of the Wine, Whiskey and Weed Show. This episode is really, really great. If you are a winery CEO or a winery leader, we chat with Matthew in this, and I really go deep into sort of P&L, the operation of a wine business, what to look for in 2025. How do you scale in 2025, given the situation that we are in? How do you be positive? How do you be optimist? How do you be a practitioner in the current landscape? What should you do? Like reserve cash or scale? Really, really, really good episode. One of my personal favorites. So check it out, and looking forward to having your comments in the feed. Thank you. I'm here with Matthew McCulloch, and he is, one of the top businessmen out there from Australia, who's really wore the hat of CEO and general manager of many wineries and grown their, top line. He also serves in the chair committee of the Wine Barossa, who's really, trying to push the Barossa wine region around the world. So we're going to pick his brain on how wineries can scale in the 2025 landscape that we currently have, Matthew. So thanks for joining me here.
My pleasure. Thanks for asking.
Great. So, why don't we give a little context about your journey and, just throw some of the names that you worked and helped, which wineries around the world, that way we can get some context out here.
My wine business career began in the UK with a company called Thierry's, which was one of the leading wine importers at the time. They had 75 suppliers from 13 countries, including Champagne Nicolas Fayette, Gerard Bertrand. There was also Ken Forrester from South Africa, Firmenich Zuccardi from Argentina. So we had, and we were responsible for about 25% of France's wine in the UK. So I was lucky enough to work with some great agency brands who've taught me a lot, and a lot of those brands have gone on to much bigger and better things. But also worked with some great people in the UK, including Dominique Vrignot, who's now Watermill Wines, and Thierry Caban, God rest his soul, and many others who are in different positions now. We moved to Australia in 2006, and I've worked for 3 South Australian wineries now, one in the Clare Valley, Kirry Hill Wines, and then moved to the Barossa, which really is the centre of premium wine in Australia. And I ran Chateau Tanunda for just under 8 years before moving to Langmeil Winery, which will be 8 years in about a week's time.
Okay, fantastic, Matthew. So let's go on, the role that a CEO or a general manager really has. How do you define your key metrics? Like, what is your scorecard?
Of course, it's financial. So that's your revenue growth in terms of conversation we're having. It's gross and net margins, the return on the investment. So Langmeil is privately owned, so what's the return on investment for the family that own it? And then the debt to equity ratio. Then when we look at production and operational, we have our own vineyards as well. So we're looking at the yield per acre from the company vineyards. We're looking at our case output, because that's a pretty simple measure to see if you're growing and scaling or not, or staying the same or going backwards. There's quality ratings, so awards, reviews, and scores as a way of benchmarking how your wines are perceived. And then also I look at staff turnover. If I have low staff turnover, I'm happy. We want staff to stay here. We want to retain them, and we don't want to have that churn. You then look at customer and sales. So obviously sales value, sales volume. In a DTC space, which is becoming increasingly important for all wineries, That's customer retention rate for the wine club and all DTC sales. Your wine club membership, is it growing? Is it static? Is it declining? And then also the mailing list. Then you've got sales channel performance, and we're looking for balance across off-premise, on-premise, and then chain retail, to ensure that, there are roughly about a third each. And then we look at the average order value. And again, that's a very simple metric to track if you are, growing or declining. We look at marketing and brand, and that's around the brand awareness, your website traffic, and your social media engagement. These are all things that you can track and measure and look at monthly. And then distribution, we look at our market penetration, our geographical reach, and our sell-through rate. So as we were talking about China, what's going in, is that equating what's going out? And then we look at sustainability and community impact, and that's having some kind of sustainability certification, and then how we engage with community. And that's a very key metric for Langmeil in particular, because we are very community focused. And then we look at it finally from a qualitative perspective, which is customer complaints and feedback, and then how Langmeil is perceived in the industry. So that's a fair few, but those are the things we look at in general.
That's the life of a CEO, right? Like everything.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. I mean, it's a great detailed breakdown that you gave. Let's boil it down to your focus, right? You only have 8 to 10 hours a day. How do you pick where your strengths, your energies? Where do you put more? Are you more optimist scale kind of guy, or you focus on saving money and increasing profits?
Look, as always, it's going to be a combination of, and it depends on the cycle the industry's in, how the company is performing any particular time, that you will focus on those areas that require more attention. If you're traveling at 50% ahead of forecast, you look at it and work out what you're doing, and you just simply do more of it. If costs are blowing out, you need to understand why are those costs blowing out. If sales are decreasing, is it down to something that Langmeil has done? Or is it down to, let's say the UK duty increasing significantly, having an effect on your retail price, and therefore people not buying as much? So the focus will shift depending on what the issue is, and that changes not every day, but it changes regularly enough that you need to be fleet of foot to really address any issues that are, potential catastrophes for a business, and try and minimize those, whilst focusing on those areas that are delivering growth or are delivering profits, and kind of fostering them. Some of the time, particularly over the last 5 years with COVID and Chinese tariffs, you feel like you're one of those plate spinners, and you've got some plates that are nice and smooth, you've got other ones doing this, and you have to work out, is it worth stopping that plate from wobbling and falling off, or actually should you actually focus on that plate, which is actually delivering margin, revenue, profit for the business, whereas if that one collapses, in the scheme of things, it's not materially important.
As a leader, I mean, have you reflected already, or do you plan to do this in last week of December, your year, and then do you plan your 2025, or have you already discussed internally what that game plan should look like?
Well, in Australia, the financial year is July 1 to June 30. So really, we start planning halfway through H2, which is from January to March, because that obviously incorporates vintage, which is one of the single biggest expenses for any winery. It also gives us a chance to review the performance in the first half of the year and address any issues in the second half of the year to achieve the targets we've set ourselves. So we are, a month out now. So we've started to begin that process, putting things together, starting to formulate and finalise, I should say, vintage 25, which will begin in February 25, in terms of tons, in terms of pricing. And that's then based on our current stocks, be it in bulk or in bottle, that we'll then address. So the planning process, there's an overarching kind of 3 to 5 year vision of where we want the business to be, which is then adjusted each year depending on, the biggest things, vintage variation. If you look at 2019, for example, that was the smallest vintage in 20 years in the Barossa. It was followed by 2020, which is the smallest vintage in 50 years. So despite the plans that we had, we simply didn't have the fruit to be able to deliver the plans.
Mm,
So you then have to adjust accordingly. Similarly, should there be a major change in any of the sales, which
mm,
could be, I know, let's say it's a delisting of a SKU in a major retailer, then suddenly you've then got to think and come up with a plan to address that, which then may affect the intake of those grapes that would have been
mhm.
destined for that product. So the overarching plan drives the annual plan, which will then take into account anything that's happened in the first 6 months of the financial year for Australia.
Okay. So I think, I mean, you are a classic example of a typical medium-sized winery, a medium to, let's say, large, who's trying to export and who have many different channels of revenue. Uh, let's focus on the current landscape that we all know. Wine is flat and maybe it's expected to be flat in, 2025. China, as we were just chatting, USA maybe is a stronger market. But how are you seeing as your most profitable sort of customer segments, like, and you can break that down in the type of the customer or channels or the countries. So especially, I mean, it's okay if you want to really focus on your own winery, how
Yeah.
what your focus is, where you see that the growth may come.
Well, look, for us, very simply, we're relatively well established. So when we're looking at markets, we would look at the figures we get from Wine Australia, which will show you the volume exported to a market, for example. It will show you the volume, the value, and the average price per litre. So from that, you can establish if a market, say like Singapore, which is very profitable, but small volume, how that compares to a volume-driven market like the UK, which is high volume but relatively low value. So you have to then balance what the opportunity is. So that when it comes to export, you just do the simple review of,
Hmm.
how does Langmeil perform against the region? So we look at the Barossa figures and say, okay, well, we are exporting roughly X percent, which is in line with the region's share. We
Hmm.
are at roughly the case price. So there's either an opportunity if we're below, or keep doing what we're doing if we're above. And then we look at the price as well. So we can work out, are we in line with what that opportunity is? When it comes to domestic, we look at the profitability by channel. And again, it will come as no surprise to anybody that DTC is the most profitable because it takes out potentially two tiers of margin from a distributor and from a retailer or another outlet on premise at the end. However, you have to balance that with the job that the distributor does for you because you're not on the road every day, you rely on them. So you need to find a balance of not taking away business from your distributor.
Hmm.
So it might be focused on exclusive wines for your direct to consumer wine club members that can't be
Hmm.
bought elsewhere. So you don't compete with your distributor. But that's very much that's where the profit is.
Hmm.
And then within that, we then look at the profitability per SKU within the range, and we review that every year to see is it delivering value, is it in growth, does it hit our target profit margins? If it does tick, let's do more of it. If it doesn't, okay, what do we need to do? What's the issue? But what we're looking at for is sustainable profits and volumes in each channel, and then so that each channel is in balance, so that no one channel, so domestic, export, on premise, off premise, chains, independent retail, fine wine retailers, none of them are too dominant within our portfolio.
Okay, so you say, I mean, sustainable growth and profit. So that makes me think that, making money is also important part of the scaling, right? Otherwise, it's no point doing a break-even growth or just for the volume sake of selling new markets, right? How do you see like when you want to wear and go aggressive, when your job is completely when the family decides or when you all decide that okay, let's just grow the top line by 20% this year, and
Mm.
and then we figure out the net profits later on. Like sometimes you think that okay, let's go get the scale and then maybe try to squeeze in the margins. How do you see this? Like, do you take that approach?
That really, I think, depends on the company's goals, growth stage, and strategy. As I said, Langmeil, as you said earlier on, it's a medium-sized winery which is established. So, as an established winery, the focus is on net profit to ensure long-term viability and stability.
What,
Whereas
what
if
do
you're
you advise, Matthew, overall? Like, do you advise operators to, in the current landscape, to sort of grow at even 5%, 10%, or you think they should make good, decent margins and be sustainable in 2025?
But as always, it's a question of balance between the two. Revenue growth without profit is unsustainable in the long run, while focusing solely on profit might stifle growth opportunities. So again, this is why I'm saying established winery, you focus on profit.
Okay.
If you're in that growth scaling stage, and the focus is on scaling quickly or gaining market share. So there are two different
So in your
approaches.
case, the profit should not go down at any cost, like because that's
Yeah.
where your main objective is.
For Langmeil, as an established winery, we are focused on net profit, but also you continually need to try and grow your revenue as well. And you can't do one in isolation of the other.
Yeah.
So but you will focus more on one when you're established, and you will focus more on growth and revenue when you're at an earlier stage.
Okay. So, I mean, let's say your books say 22%, I'm just throwing a number here, net profit. So any new activity or any new growth plan, ultimately the P&L of that exercise should have at least that much, right? Like, is it going to make us, let's say if we're aiming to grow into Thailand now, is it going to yield us 22%? Otherwise, forget about it.
Well, exactly. So that again comes to that analysis we're talking about. What's the size of the prize? So a lot of people talk about India. I can tell you that Barossa exported about 209 litre equivalent to India last year. So really, the time and investment, let's say you were brilliant enough to capture 50% of the market, you're going to get 100 dozen. It really just isn't worth it yet.
Yeah.
So that's the first thing, is to work out, is this worth investing time and money? Or are there other things that we can do? There are plenty of things that you can do to grow net margins through operational efficiencies, better managing your inventory, not sitting on dead stock, making sure you turn that over. You could consider, as a way of growing, if you just have a brand, you could do some private label. So, for example, Langmeil supplies Marks and Spencer's and Waitrose in the UK. With a couple of wines. You review your portfolio regularly, so you avoid that long tail of excess inventory and slow movers. You look at your pricing, and you review and increase that annually or per vintage, which is probably more common, to avoid that constant chipping away and margin erosion. You can explore government grants and tax incentives. So we've just had, I think, a $20,000 grant to improve our energy efficiency, 100% funded by the government. So the paperwork exercise helps us out at no cost to us, apart from time. And then probably one of the biggest ones in terms of that, how you grow that net margin, is your customer retention. Is focus on retaining those high value customers, particularly through DTC, be that through loyalty or exclusive experiences. Retention ultimately is always cheaper than acquisition. And it drives repeat business. Those people are already in and signed up. They're more likely to support you and your business.
So let's go there. If Dan Murphy's in Australia, or any, like, let's say Tesco says, okay, we're done with this private label project, thank you very much. How do you retain them? Like, what are some tactics you do to, sort of retain? Or let's say Dan Murphy is saying, okay, great working with you, and now I think we're off to the different supplier. Any practical tips on sort of winning them back with some deals or relation plays or steak dinner, whatever it is? I don't know, but can you share us some examples of how what works usually?
Yeah, look, I think it's, I've been supplying the supermarkets in the UK in particular for nearly 30 years now. A lot of it is the relationship, and things go wrong. Things don't work out. It's always about the communication. As long as people are open and honest, and you understand why. Again, was it something that the retailer did that led to the product not performing? Was it something that the winery did? Was it the packaging? Was it the blend? Was it the style? What caused that product not to hit the benchmarks or the hurdles that the retailer set? So if you understand that, you say, right, okay, well, we tried that. So if that product has not worked, how do we retain a Langmeil SKU within that business? So, for example, we had one where they said, oh, look, no, we don't think that wine's going to perform anymore. However, what we are looking for is a Malbec. Can you provide us with a Barossa Malbec? I said, well, yes, of course we can. So we then switched. So we didn't lose the brand position, but it changed from, SKU X to SKU Y. And that then comes with, just, not cracking the sads with the retailer if they say to you, no, that's it, that one's not worked. It's understanding why and then being flexible enough to say, okay, well, look, we don't want to lose the relationship. We worked for a number of years for whatever reason, and we understand why. That product hasn't worked or that SKU has not worked. What can we do together to create something else so that we don't lose, a SKU in your list? Because the best thing about retailers is they give you a national footprint. Comes at a cost, of course, but it's about that mental availability and the physical availability of your brand. The mental availability is people being aware of it, and the physical availability is being able to find it, hopefully within an arm's reach of desire where they are now, be that online, be it in that local retailer, or be it in their hotel or restaurant chain. You don't want to lose those slots, so you need to be flexible, you need to be adaptable, understand why something didn't work, but push to retain your product in there, even if it's a new product.
As the CEO, you want to say hello to these important customers, right? Because you either want to, mainly your own customers, because of relationships, they will retain as well, right? I'll tell you my process. So what we've started doing is we've identified our top 100 customers across our events and competitions. And my job is just to say hello to them, no matter what, just a hello call, right? So do you have anything where on purpose, you as a CEO has to say something or do something with the top customers?
Yeah, look, sometimes, but ultimately I've got a team, including people in sales and marketing, and we do not hire these people to do their jobs for them. However, if it comes to a tricky negotiation where they might need some support, if it comes to thanking the retailer for having a great year or thanking the distributor for doing a good job, we'll certainly do that. But on a day-to-day basis, no, I try and keep out because it's not my role. I oversee it, I'm aware of it, but I'm not there to do their jobs for them. However, having said that, because of specific experience and existing relationships, I look after the retailers we deal with in the UK because I've been there. Marks and Spencer's, for example, I've been supplying them with wine for 29 years. So you're crazy not to maintain that level of contact throughout a business over time. Similarly, in export, we divide export between 3 people. I'll look after a little bit of it, which, as I said, was the UK retailers plus a distributor in Northern Ireland. And then I have a series of customers in China who I've been dealing with for 15 years. So again, relationships are very important, but all the rest is where there's a sales team. But every now and then, as you say, at events or wherever you pop up, you say hello, you make sure you're aware of what's going on, who's doing a good job, and thanking them for it.
Okay, so let me ask you on the second part, which you also said, for net margins, price increase maybe is one of the things that you have to see every year. How do you communicate, especially when it's a tough market like 2025? As we know, it's very hard for a winery to have that audacity to the big buyer and say, hey, we're going to increase the price by 5%. And if you have to, because you want to grow your margins, what is your process? If you can walk us through on convincing them or getting them on board as a partner and renewing the contracts.
We take, again, a fairly open and honest approach with our customers. If there are price increases, we go through and we show exactly where those price increases have been incurred. So, for example, in Australia, Dan Murphy's is part of Endeavour Group. We bottle our wines at Vinpac, which is part of Endeavour Group. Vinpac pass on to us cost increases in terms of service fees and dry goods. So it's fairly reasonable for us to ask Dan Murphy's, for example, well, one part of your business has increased our costs. Therefore, the percentage increases that we've had, here's what we're asking for. But we always break that down because there are wage decisions each year which may increase wages. There is CPI or inflation, electricity, fuel, diesel. We go through and we work out what all those increases are. We share them with our customers and say, this might add up to, pick a number, 10%. We're asking for X% of that 10% to ensure we are not going back in real terms. You also then take a view on which products are strategically important,
Mm-hmm.
which might sit on a barrier of a price point. So let's say there's a wine that might be £9 in the UK, and if you force your price rise through, you'll go to £11. Now you'll get your price rise, but your sales will fall significantly, and you will lose revenue, but you might maintain your profit. So this is where the balance comes in. And then you also then look at products where you can afford to possibly put through a full price increase, because realistically, let's say it's a $50 wine, and if you've got $50, probably realistically, you're not going to bat an eyelid if that wine goes from 50 to 52.
Mm.
You're already at the top end of the market. You know, you're likely to be less affected as opposed to more at the entry point. So you go through and you take a view. But I think the key thing is to look at trying to get a little bit each year, because otherwise, if you don't, after 5 years, and we've seen particularly through the COVID and the disruption that that's led to in the global supply chain, is that we've had, almost 15% over, if not more, over those past few years. And if you haven't put a little bit through each year, you suddenly go, hang on, I've got to put through a significant price increase, which a customer is more likely to balk at because of the size of it. They'll very, very soon forget that you haven't put the price up for 5 years. But they'll get very focused on that big rise you try to put through in 1 year. So little and often, make it reasonable, explain why, be open, show the numbers in terms of the percent increases you've incurred. And we've found that tends to get most of them through. Some people, no, they just will point blank refuse. And again, that comes to taking a view on how important that customer is or how strategic that product might be.
Great. I want to pick your brain as a leader also. I mean, I really want to understand when the tough time comes. Or let's say, when you're not scaling for like a couple of years, as most of us, like even us, let's say it's been a flat last couple of years. It's very hard for a CEO, self-doubt comes, it's hard for the team, like especially that, right? Like when your team or employees don't see the growth, they start worrying, So how do you inspire people? How do you do self-talks? Just walk us through. You've seen more cycles than like obviously me for sure. So how do you, justify that, okay, it's going to come, and be optimist?
I think that's obviously a mindset and a personality trait. You're either more positive or not. But certainly, if the last 5 years have taught us anything, it's the strength of resilience and being resilient. And always with the team, we always ask ourselves if the setbacks or the decline in growth or decrease, is it something that Langmeil has done that has led to that, or is it something beyond our control? So I've tried to encourage the team to only worry about what they can control and what they can't, but you do need to be acutely aware of what's happening around us. So you've got to approach a setback dispassionately, see it as it is and not worse than it is. And then try and come up with creative solutions to that setback or alternative activities in mitigation. So if that's not going to work and it's dead and gone, right, okay. And again, let's say that was a $100,000 thing. Where can we find another $100,000? What can we do that isn't trying to, stop continuing down the same path, which isn't giving us a result? What can we do that would generate the equivalent funds to put back in? And that's certainly during COVID and the Chinese tariffs, that's worked for us. On the other side of things, outside of sales, you then look at your expenses, and if you're not generating your forecasts and the money required, then you simply cut your cloth accordingly. If you haven't got the money, so all those nice things to had you wanted done, if they are not going to fundamentally affect your business, you just pause them temporarily. Maintain the cash. That's really important. As everyone will know, in winery management, cash flow is absolute king. And certainly when you're making premium wine, because the amount of stock you're carrying and for how long you're carrying it, you've got to maintain your cash. So look, it really is, it's about resilience and just working out, is it something that we've done?
mm,
And if it is, then we learn from it. So there's no blame culture. There's nothing wrong with trying something and it not working. You do and review. And I hope that my team sort of certainly feels that. And it's all of us. It's not you. You did this and it didn't work. Or it's not we. We did it. We tried it. It didn't work. So what are we going to do to try and get out of this? So it's that fear of knowing you've got the ability to try things. You're not going to be singled out. We work as a team. And if things aren't working and times are tough, which they have been, don't get me wrong, this last 5 years has been like nothing I've seen in 30. Markets grow and fade. The tariffs, for example, is one day to the next.
yeah,
COVID was completely disrupting the geopolitical situation in the Northern Hemisphere, completely disrupting supply chains and putting pressure on all sorts of things. It really is just the most bizarre time. And it's not like it's a one-off event and then 2 or 3 years later it's something else. It's year after year after year. So we're hoping that this kind of 5 to 7 year cycle is that we're almost at the end of it.
I mean, we both know that it's better to be smart in 2025. Like, it's no point, as you said, like, preserve the cash, because that looks like it's going to be the king, and the companies that have something in their bank will survive. Otherwise, it's going to be very bad, right? But on the other side, you have this entrepreneur in you. You have this growth pressure. That if you're not growing, you're dying. Someone else is growing. You have those kind of things. So, like, it's so hard, I mean, to be disciplined when you know that it's better to be disciplined, but you start doing your adventure moves and then you try two things, you fail in one thing. How are you playing your 2025? Like, let's go back on the closing question on scaling. Like, are you scaling or are you focusing on profits? And if you are, either choose one and then tell us exact 3 or 4 things that you're really hyper focused.
Yeah, look, I think as I said, both, because it's not a question of either or. You don't just do one thing or the other. So we're looking at growing revenue. So to grow revenue, you need new customers. We added Waitrose in the UK this year, and we added Trader Joe's in the States this year. Those are 2 significant customers. So that grows revenue. Then you look at, like, where can we increase our net profit? A lot of that comes from the return of China because of the value of the wines they were purchasing. There's a lot of, it's just a numbers game. There's a lot of high net worth individuals in China who are prepared to buy those high value wines in quantity, either for their own small scale wine business or their personal enjoyment or with their network of friends. So one side, you're targeting the high net worth individuals in Asia and also within our DTC, so the wine club in particular. And on the other hand, we're looking at growing our customer base in established markets. So Waitrose UK, Trader Joe's in the US. And we will keep looking for those opportunities if they align with Langmeil's objectives. Long-term, Langmeil is not chasing entry-level wine. It's it's looking for sustainable long-term customers who will retain with us. We've been with Marks and Spencer's. I've been supplying them a Barossa Shiraz now for, 11, 12 vintages consecutively. That's the kind of customer that you want. So, as I said, it's not net profit or revenue. It's a combination of the two. And certainly, if the last 5 years has taught us anything, it's that you have got to have multiple strategies running, because certainly the industry is not performing the way it has done traditionally. There was pre-2020 and there's post-2020. And running a winery looks very, very different now to how it looked then. It's driven focus on certain areas, particularly DTC. So we've grown that from 20% of our business to almost a third. And that's been absolutely key for us. And then we've looked at the balance between export and domestic as well, given the volatility in exports as a result of geopolitical situations, shipping disruptions, tariffs in China having now gone, potential tariffs in the US, whatever it may be. You've got to be flexible, you've got to be adaptable, you've got to think quickly, and you've got to have multiple solutions to multiple problems, because they will keep coming. You can't just sit there and go, oh no, this has happened now, what are we going to do? Okay, so this has happened. What are we going to do?
Mm.
What ideas have you got, team? What can we look at doing? Is it a new product through DTC? Is it approaching another retailer because they're looking for like an old vine product which we
Mm.
specialize in, or is it looking at something which is sustainable because we've got sustainable wine growing Australia certification? It's just looking at all those opportunities and making sure that you are able to fulfill
Mm.
them
So
and give off the best.
who's your top level, like what is the name of that position in sales? Is it an export manager or a sales manager? What is it called in your winery?
Well, there are two. So we have James Lindner, who is a co-proprietor of Langmeil. He's also our sales and marketing director. And we have Lee Woodrow, who is our sales manager, who looks after Negociants, which is our most important customer in Australia. And then he also looks after some of the export markets. So as I said, James and Lee look after domestic. And then James and Lee look after some of the export, and I look after a very small bit of the export. And then we also have a DTC manager based at the winery as well as a cellar door manager to cover the whole of that DTC side of things.
Let's say these three positions, these three pillars of your, top level chains and growth. Let's go on the first one, which is the director of sales and marketing. What kind of reports do you ask on a weekly basis, or how do you measure his performance? What kind of targets are you planning to give him for 2025 when it comes to growth?
Yeah, simply we review the sales on a monthly basis. And with Negociants, for example, our Australian distributor, we can monitor that daily from using their sales platform based on Salesforce. So monthly we review, where are we against the forecast? Are we below, at, or above? What's driving that? Does it require any corrective actions? The annual forecast is established between the sales and marketing director or the sales manager and their customer. It's agreed. From my side of things, I need to make sure that it is agreed, because if people don't buy in, they won't achieve it. It does need to be achievable, and it does need to be reasonably stretching. But I think it's counterproductive to set too high targets and people fail, demotivated, unhappy. So, and then also the key is to have that forecasting discussion with your customer, because ultimately they will know best. While as much as you would like to sell them a million cases or something, it might not be possible. So once we've done that, we then look and go, okay, well, that's manageable or not manageable, or we're going to have to work out that if that customer is not delivering what we expected, where does that shortfall come from? Who is going to deliver it? Where is it going to come from? So that's monthly on the sales. So that's the sales volume, sales value, gross profit, net profit. And then we review the expenses monthly as well to ensure that they're in track. And then we have obviously the quarterly numbers and bank reporting and so on. And within each of those salespeople responsible for cellar door, DTC, domestic, export, that is all tied up in the monthly review process. So we track things and we can see pretty quickly if there's a trend that's trending down. Okay, we're going to have to address this. What do we do? Or it's tracking perfectly where we thought. Happy days. Or even better, it's above forecast. And then understand why is it above forecast. So because if that's above forecast for that customer, what have we done there that's working that we can take and then use elsewhere?
What are the two or three concerns that they've shared with you, that this is coming up lately a lot?
The biggest concerns I think we face, certainly from sales perspective, is regulatory changes in different markets. So UK.
So the customers are waiting because of that. Customers are waiting. They don't know what's coming. Is it? Chains are waiting.
It's uncertainty. That the UK is a classic example. They put up duty by 20%, and this is potentially this absolute, I can't use that word, in February 25, when there's going to be these 30 bans in duty between 11.5 and 14.5, just the whole additional complication that's going to lead to making business more difficult. But what that led to, that increase in duty, and I think the WSTA have shown this, I think it was a £600 million decrease in tax take, because people have gone, okay, you now taxing is too much, we're not going to buy. we're not buying as much alcohol, or they're going to start buying illegal drugs, or they're going to start buying, counterfeit booze because it's cheaper. That's the sort of effect. Again, is that my sales manager's fault? No, absolutely not. That's what they're dealing with. The WHO saying there's no safe
the neo prohibition thing and the
So again, we can't control this, but it's something we've got to deal with. It's labelling issues, the potential health warnings in Ireland. It's the increase in taxes in Canada. It's having to incorporate deposit return schemes in California. Energy and ingredient labelling for the EU and potentially coming to the US as well. So lots of these things that just make life more complex and business more difficult. And distracts from, ultimately, growing great grapes, making great wine, selling great wine with personality, with strong brands that people come back for. So that's another one that's an issue. And then obviously just what's happening in the world at the moment. It's not pretty out there. Trump getting back in the States, does this mean there's going to be 10% tariffs on all imports? That's going to have a material impact. Unlike China, when it was on Australia, at least that's on everyone. So everyone is facing the same issue, but it's still going to make it slightly less attractive. So there's always lots of things. It's looking at, lightweighting glass, for example. That takes time because we have a bottle that we use, which we buy a lot of in advance. It takes time to work through. But we're working on lightweighting that bottle from 530 down to 410 grams to keep ahead of what's coming. But you need to be aware of these things. And that challenge in terms of reducing weight of glass becomes an issue that the Sustainable Wine Roundtable is driving with Total Wines or with the Wine Society in the UK or with Systembolaget in Sweden. So these things are all coming and it's having to deal with them, which is time-consuming, complex, and doesn't necessarily translate into any additional sales. It's just dealing with increasing complexity to be able to almost stand still.
Like one of the smart, like one of the things a lot of wineries, especially in US, like O'Neill or Gallo or the big ones, are doing to solve some of the mysteries and to play the game is to introduce their own low and no alcohol range or playing that category as well, a little bit, What is your internal process? Have you decided you're going to also come out with a low or no, or you think it's just a wave, or what's your view on that?
Oh no, irrespective of I think it's a great idea or a terrible idea or it's a trend, it's a fad, whatever. Again, you have to look at what the brand is. People are not coming to Langmeil for a low or no experience. That is a beverage. It could come from anywhere. If you take Barossa Shiraz, for example, it lives around 14% alcohol. It's rich, it's generous, it's soft, it's smooth, it's intense.
I get that, but let's say your customers are just asking more and more of this thing, eventually, don't you think that someone in Barossa will start offering that to just keep the shelf space or to keep the customer?
Look, I'm sure they will, but for Langmeil, that's not true to our brand.
Okay.
So we're not going to play. We have, for example, a wine called Live Wire, which is a Riesling where we stop the fermentation early. So it's about 9%, 8.5%, 9% alcohol, and it's got about 25 grams per litre of residual sugar, as in the non-fermented sugars. That to us is our low. That's what we're going to do. We have our Eden Valley Dry Riesling is around 11%. So we are not going to change the wines we make under our brand to try and take advantage of a trend.
Because in UK also, this whole structure of 9 to 11, people are going to play that game now, the low alcohol for the import duties. I'm sure you would know that. Appreciate it, but I really like that you want to keep your values, and it's a very long-term value alignment goal here. One last one on sort of inspiring, like on the CEOs, maybe just close it up with some inspirational things that people can take from you, and really practical optimism, right? So where you think that how you should advise them, especially the young operators out there, that okay, This is how you should play 2025, and be as practical as you can, Matthew.
Oh, look, it's really simple. Be really clear what your brand is, what it stands for, and what your objectives are. And don't get distracted. The single biggest thing you can do is focus. Once you've got that laser focus on what you want to achieve, you then do also have to be flexible and adaptable based on what's happening that you can't control, but is going to have an impact on you and your business. And see any issues as they are and not worse than they are. And don't get emotional about them. Just focus on what the issue is and coming up with solutions and coming up with alternatives. But don't be too hard on yourself. This is an exceptional time period we're going through at the moment as a cycle, but it really comes down to focus, flexibility, being resilient, and staying true to your brand and communicating with your customers. Because the more you can communicate with your customers, they understand you, your winery, your brand, your values, your vision, your mission, and you talk to them and you involve them and you deliver excellent customer service if they come to the cellar door, or they buy from you direct, or they buy through a distributor. When you're out on the road, you sell with personality. It's a bit like the BBC. You've got to, inform, educate, and entertain. That's what you need to do when you're selling your product. Do it with personality. Because ultimately, in 2025, and this is only going to increase, the pie is not getting any bigger. If you are growing, you are taking share from somebody else. Now, that's either in your region, in your country, or from just people in general. So you need to be really clear about that. So you could look at your competitors and you might want to pick off a wine that you want to target, that you believe you can deliver better quality, lower price, higher margin, whatever it might be. Just be focused and keep working on that balance of growing your revenue, which is new customers, and your net profit, which is making more from selling it and trying to sell more yourself.